What you're looking at right now is called a fur seal, but that name is almost a triple lie. It's not a cat, it's barely even a seal, and for about 300 days a year, this creature doesn't see land at all. It sleeps, eats, and lives entirely in the open ocean, thousands of kilometers from shore. And yet, once a year, this female will find her one single pup in a crowd of 1 million screaming strangers, without a single mistake, essentially blind, using nothing but smell and sound. And about 150 years ago, humans nearly wiped this species off the face of the earth, not out of cruelty, but almost by accident, chasing after just one part of its body. This is the story of one fur seal female, and possibly the most underrated animal in the ocean. Hey, today it's all about fur seals. We're going to follow their entire life journey, from birth on a crowded rookery to a solitary trek across the entire ocean. Along the way, we'll cover why they're not actually seals at all and who their real relatives are, how a mother finds her pup in a crowd of 1 million, a dark chapter of history that nearly wiped out the entire species, and what life looks like for an animal that spends 300 days a year in open water without ever touching land. Let's start at the very beginning, with birth. The first thing to understand about fur seals is that they belong to a separate family called eared seals, Otariidae, and that's not the same thing as true seals, family Phocidae, which includes, for example, the common harbor seal. The difference isn't just cosmetic. Fur seals have small but visible external ear flaps, hence the name eared seals. True seals have no external ears at all, just openings. Even more important are the hind flippers. In fur seals, they rotate forward, letting the animal push up on all 4 limbs and move across land fairly quickly, almost at a run. A true seal on land can only awkwardly wriggle along on its belly. Its hind flippers point backward and don't take part in walking at all. Genetically, eared seals, including fur seals, split off from a common ancestor shared with bears and mustelids roughly 25 to 30 million years ago, which means, on the evolutionary tree, a fur seal sits much closer to a bear or a dog than to the seal it's usually shown next to in documentaries. Our heroine, a female northern fur seal, was born on one of the Pribilof Islands in the Bering Sea, one of the largest rookeries of this species on the planet. And within the first seconds of her life, she's thrown into deafening chaos. On just a couple of square kilometers of rocky shore, tens of thousands of pups just like her are being born and crying out at the same time. The rookery where our heroine was born is a dense, deafening, fish-smelling mass of animals. The largest northern fur seal rookeries can hold up to 1 million individuals at once during the season. A few days after giving birth, the mother leaves her pup on the shore and heads out to feed in the ocean, sometimes for a week, sometimes longer, hundreds of kilometers from the rookery. When she comes back, she faces a task that seems, at first glance, impossible: finding her one and only pup among tens of thousands that all look almost identical. She manages it using a combination of 2 senses. First, every pup has an individual voice, a distinctive cry the mother memorizes in the first days after birth. She swims up to the shore and starts calling. Hundreds of pups respond, but she picks out one single familiar voice from that chorus without fail. Second, once she gets closer, smell takes over. She sniffs the pup's face to confirm it really is her own. If the scent doesn't match, and sometimes a hungry pup that isn't hers tries to nurse from the first female it finds, the mother shoves the imposter away, and sometimes even bites it. This is a recognition system whose reliability is comparable to human identification systems, except instead of fingerprints or faces, it runs on voice and smell, honed over millions of years of evolution, in conditions where a single mistake means the pup starves to death. And now, a part of the story almost nobody remembers, even though it changed international law. A century and a half ago, the fur of this very animal, the one that just found her way back to her pup, was worth more on the markets of London and St. Petersburg than sable fur. A single coat made from it cost more than a working family's entire yearly income. The outcome was predictable and grim. Over the course of a few decades, the northern fur seal population was driven down from several million animals to the brink of complete extinction. The hunting was so predatory and unregulated that 4 empires ended up dragged into it at once. And oddly enough, that's exactly what ended up saving the species. I'll explain how a single document, signed in 1911, became the first international wildlife conservation treaty in history, and why, without it, our heroine most likely wouldn't exist at all. In the 19th century, the Pribilof Islands, where hundreds of thousands of fur seals are born today, became the stage for one of the most intense marine mammal hunts in human history. The only thing that mattered was the fur. Fur seals have the densest coat of any mammal on the planet. A single square centimeter of skin can hold up to 40,000 to 50,000 hairs, and by some estimates, the density of the underfur reaches several 100,000 hairs per square inch. An animal needs a coat like that because, unlike true seals, it has a relatively thin layer of blubber. The heat is held in mainly by the fur, which traps a layer of air against the skin. That very density of fur is what nearly destroyed the species. Companies from Russia, the United States, Great Britain, via Canada, and Japan carried out unregulated hunting, not only on the rookeries, but directly out at sea, shooting animals, including pregnant females, during migration. As a result, the population collapsed rapidly, and by the early 20th century, the species was on the brink of disappearing entirely. The situation became so critical that in 1911, 4 countries, the United States, the Russian Empire, Great Britain, and Japan, signed a convention on the conservation of fur seals in the North Pacific. This agreement completely banned hunting the animals at sea and strictly regulated harvesting on the rookeries. Legal historians consider this document the first international treaty in history devoted entirely to protecting a wild species. Many principles of modern conservation law were later built on top of it. Thanks to the treaty, the population began recovering within the first decades of the 20th century. Here's an ironic but true detail. If the 4 empires hadn't driven the situation to the brink of total extinction, the political will to create a document that became the blueprint for today's international conservation system probably wouldn't have existed either. Our heroine, born today on the Pribilof Islands, is a direct result of this century-long recovery experiment. Though it's worth being honest here, despite the recovery, the northern fur seal population has been slowly declining again since the mid-20th century, for different reasons, which we'll get to shortly. Once our heroine grows up and leaves the rookery, the strangest part of her life begins. Adult female northern fur seals spend only about 2 months a year on land during the breeding season. The rest of the time, sometimes up to 300 days straight, the animal lives entirely in the open ocean, occasionally thousands of kilometers from the nearest shore. That poses an unusual problem for the body. How do you sleep when there's no land or ice beneath you, just open water all around? Fur seals solve this with a distinctive posture biologists call the jug handle position. The animal curls up on the water's surface, raising one front flipper and one hind flipper into the air, like handles, while the rest of the body stays slightly submerged. The flippers sticking out of the water help regulate body temperature, and the seal dozes right there, floating and rocking on the waves. And they're impressive divers, too. Adults can descend to depths of over 200 meters and stay underwater for several minutes at a time, hunting fish and squid that themselves rise toward the surface at night, following the plankton. Over the course of a migration season, our heroine can swim thousands of kilometers. Some northern fur seals migrate all the way from the Bering Sea down to Southern California and back. spending months at a stretch traveling and living in open water, almost without ever stopping on land. The 1911 treaty saved the species from being wiped out directly by humans. But today, our heroine and millions of fur seals like her face new, less obvious threats. A warming ocean is shifting the migration routes of the fish they feed on, forcing them to dive deeper and swim farther, spending more energy to catch the same amount of food, which takes a toll on pup survival. A separate and very concrete danger is plastic debris, specifically scraps of fishing net and packaging straps. Young, curious fur seals often stick their heads through loops of this debris, which then grows into their necks as the animal matures, causing severe injuries. Researchers estimate that tens of thousands of fur seals die or are injured every year, specifically because of marine debris. Because of this combination of factors, the northern fur seal population on the Pribilof Islands has dropped by more than half since the 1950s, and the species is now classified as threatened, despite a century of legal protection. Our heroine's story is, at its core, the story of an animal that nearly lost everything because of one detail of its body, was saved by the first international wildlife conservation treaty in history, and is now teetering on the edge again, this time because of problems we create simply by living differently than we did 100 years ago. Fur seals aren't seals, they aren't cats, and they're definitely not just cute animals from a video. This is a creature that spends most of its life somewhere with no land and no landmarks at all, and yet every single year finds its way back to its one and only pup among a million unfamiliar voices. If you enjoyed following the story of one fur seal female, hit like. I'll make more videos in this format. Let me know in the comments, which fact surprised you the most? That fur seals are closer to bears than to true seals? The story of the 1911 treaty? Or the way they sleep right out in the open ocean? Like the video? Support our channel via the link in the description. And if you want a dedicated video on true seals or on walruses, let me know. We'll cover it. See you in deep.